All right. Let me get the YouTube link here, and then we will send it out to the Chavra, I think. And we'll copy the. There we go. And there we got Monday Halacha. We're live. And one more that we need to send here. Because Darren said that he wouldn't be able to come tonight, but he wants to join. Good. Live now. There we go. Okay, Chavra. We spoke about the mitzvah Pru Urvu last week, which is the first mitzvah in the Torah, the first mitzvah the Sefer HaChinuch speaks about, and we spoke about the definition of the mitzvah Pru Urvu and the makar, the source for the mitzvah Pru Urvu, as the pasuk says, "Vayivarach Hashem Elokim vayom Elohem Elokim Pru Urvu." And then we spoke about the Gemaras that detail the obligation of Pru Urvu, at least in its most complete sense, is to have a male and female child. And then we discussed the definition of male and female with regards to androgynous and tumtum. And then we left off last week with the question, and we're going to discuss this inside, which is, what happens if the child that you have is halachically problematic? What do we mean by halachically problematic? So if you take a look at the paragraph Vihine, you'll see this on page Aleph over here. Vihine. So says the Minchas Chinuch as follows. He says, Vihine im holid ben v'achar kach naaseh p'tzur daka v'kar shivcha de'einu roi laholid. What happens if you have a son who was healthy and well, and then some terrible accident happened, and all of a sudden they are now no longer able to have children, right? They were rendered infertile. Or you have a girl that was healthy and well. She was not an islandess, meaning she wasn't incapable of having children, but something happened and now she is no longer able to have children. And now she can't have children anymore. It used to be that she could, now she can't. For sure, you have not fulfilled your obligation of having children, because the children that you have can't have more children. If a person's children died, so you haven't fulfilled the mitzvah of having children, because those children can't produce more children. It says, and it doesn't seem to make a difference whether this happened accidentally or this happened as a result of some freak occurrence, or it happened as a result of a disease, or children were born like that. Anything that would render a child incapable of having children of their own would make it that you haven't fulfilled the mitzvah of Pru Urvu. Meaning, you can really never know that you fulfilled the mitzvah of Pru Urvu until your children have children. So everybody's like, a holding pattern for like a few decades until their children have children, and then you know if you fulfilled the mitzvah or not. And then he says, Mavur b'Shulchan Aruch, says in the Shulchan Aruch, Haya haben katan kiyem ha-mitzvah. But the Shulchan Aruch says that if you have a child, if you have a child that's alive and well, he's a katan, kiyem ha-mitzvah, you fulfill the mitzvah. So how do you know that you fulfilled the mitzvah? Who says you did? It says, V'nir di'im higia le'yud gimel shanim. V'loi hevi ishtei saras, base saras, the yotzim michlal harayv, the chazaka de rabba, v'havale sofek shema nashu, im ken chayiv mi sofek b'pir v'rivia, shema yimatzei haben saris, v'zeh pashil. He says something fascinating. He says, but were it to be that you have a child, he's 13 years old. He's already become 13 in one day, he's bar mitzvah. But he hasn't yet hit puberty at all. Minimal level of hitting puberty is that a person has 2 pubic hairs, right? That's shtei saras. That's the minimal definition of puberty. So he says, once the child is 13 and hasn't hit puberty, so it seems to be that now you should be concerned. Maybe I should go have more children, because the child that I have might not be able to have their own children. Why? Because the majority of children, once they hit the age of 13 and one day, bar mitzvah, have begun going through puberty. If your kid hasn't, maybe that means that they're not going to. Maybe there's some issue. So now you should try and have more children. Misafek. Now, I don't know anybody that has practiced this in recent years, practically speaking, because we have a lot of medical testing that can be done today to absolve us of this suffix, right? You go to the endocrinologist and they'll say, yeah, take this hormone and let's see, right? It's not such a mystery. It used to be, right? It used to be a huge mystery. You never knew like where you were holding or what your children were going to be capable of or not capable of. Now, that doesn't mean that today they aren't, unfortunately, surprises that people have, but it's a lot easier to figure these things out. But what the Minchas Chinuch is saying, the Shulchan Aruch says that you fulfill the mitzvah once you have a child, but that's only you fulfill the mitzvah al pi raiv. I mean, statistically, you fulfilled the mitzvah, but at some point in time, you might realize that you haven't fulfilled the mitzvah, and that point, shkayach. And at that point, once you have discovered that statistically you haven't fulfilled the mitzvah, maybe now you need to go back and try to fulfill it again. There you go. And then he says, okay, so far we've spoken about what happens if you have an androgynous, and what happens if you have a tumtum, and what happens if you have a son who seems healthy and well until they turn 13, and then it's questionable, in which case one should try to have more children. He says, "V'im hoylid ben oibas." If you had a son or a daughter, mikol makom, in general, afilu cherish v'shoite. What if they're a cherish, they're a deaf mute, or a shoite, they're an imbecile? Now, it's sometimes in Talmudic writings, cherish means deaf, and sometimes it means deaf mute. Depends on the context. Shoite means somebody that is not of sound mind. So this could be somebody that is severely autistic, or it could be somebody that is emotionally disturbed. Could also be a shaita, meaning they do crazy things. Like Ramosha has a tshuva about a guy from way back in Europe. The halacha is just the short synopsis of this is the story was that this guy was married and his wife didn't want to be married to him anymore, and she wanted a get. So the halacha is that a shaita can't give a get. So Ramosha had to figure out if this guy was a shaita, meaning he's an imbecile. Can he give? Is he capable of giving a get?
People getting married though.
So you might be. Yeah. It might be. Right. So right. So it's also possible, right? So you have certain circumstances that a person is a shaita sometimes, right? This happens. There was a case a number of years ago. It happens from time to time that you had a guy that had that was going through the beginnings of severe dementia, and his wife, and the particularities of the circumstance in that case not super important, but it happens from time to time. You have a guy who's married that doesn't that the couple was never going to have children, so he wants to give his wife a get. She wants to get a get so that she doesn't end up having to find the brother-in-law to do yibum chalitza, right? You don't want to end up doing chalitza, so she'd rather be divorced than have to deal with chalitza, because then you have to go and find the brother, and he wasn't from, and he was like living somewhere far east, like. But she didn't want to have to go through chalitza. She wanted the husband to give a get. So the problem is that he was already in the beginnings of severe dementia, but he had moments of lucidity. Sometimes he was lucid, sometimes he wasn't. So when he's lucid, he's not a shaita. When he isn't lucid, he is a shaita. Right? So they had to have a shliach standing there with two edim that like were there for a couple of days, like waiting for like moments of lucidity to say to him, "Are you happy to appoint this person to be a shliach to give a get to your wife?" And then they chapped him. He said, "Yes, I don't want her to have to worry about chalitza, so I'd like to give a get to my wife." So they appointed a shliach. They got a get for so that she didn't have to find They didn't have to fund. It could be days, weeks, months, years. She wanted to look after him, but she didn't want to end up in a situation of chalitza. There's a lot of these situations are very tragic when these kinds of things happen. But you have a case of this is what Ramosha was talking about. There's a guy that the wife wanted to get a get, but Ramosha wasn't sure if it was meshuggah. What does it mean it was meshuggah? Is that when he was younger, from time to time, he would strip off all of his clothes, run around naked, climb up to the top of trees, and scream, "I'm Mashiach, I'm Mashiach." So right, that's I think definitionally shaita, right? We call him a shaita. He's a shaita. He's not of sound mind. That's called a shaita. He's not capable of rendering intelligent decisions as far as the majority of people understand. Maybe some people agree with him, but right, that's the point. So Ramosha had to go and speak to this guy. So he hadn't done this for many, many, many years. So Ramosha sat down with him and had a heart to heart and said, I just need to understand, do you still hold that you're Mashiach? So he goes, yes. So he said to him, but do you then how come you don't run around anymore naked and climb trees? He says, well, I want to, but nobody listens to me. So I'm not. So that's a shaita. He can't give a get. So you have to wait, get him to a good psychiatrist, get him medication that he doesn't run around thinking that he's Mashiach, climbing trees and screaming, naked in the middle of the winter, I'm Mashiach, like that's right.
What's the final one? This seems very relative. That seems like an extreme case.
Yes.
Someone could claim, hysteria. My wife is hysterical.
Right.
It used to be a condition.
Right.
Nowadays, it's like, let's say you go thousands of years back. Oh, my son, he's insane. He thinks the world is round.
Right.
You still think the world is round? Yes, I swear it's round. It's crazy.
Right. Yeah. So it's the definition of shota is very, very hard to pin down. And when we get to some of the other halachas in the chinuch, we're going to see these things developed a lot stronger. But shota means, I'll say like this: shota is probably mitzvah specific. There are some mitzvahs that we will say a shota is that a person is a shota for this, but not a shota for that. It's probably mitzvah specific. And this is where the chinuch says that if you have a child that is a cherish or a shota, so kiyama mitzvah, they have fulfilled. You have fulfilled the mitzvah of having children. If your child is a deaf mute or a shota, it says dehem b'nei mitzvahs. They are for sure obligated in mitzvahs. These children that you have are obligated in mitzvahs. At least the asla achilim b'yadayim davar yisur. At the very least, even the most severely autistic child, you certainly are not allowed to feed them treif. Can't feed them treif, meaning you can't give them treif. You have to feed them kosher food, right? Meaning they're Jews and they're alive, and they're your children. So it says v'ru'uyim laholid, and physically. Now, this isn't true in every case, but physiologically, they are capable of fathering children or capable of becoming pregnant. Meaning, ru'uyim laholid. Now, that doesn't mean that one would recommend that people that are severely autistic father children. That's not a good idea in most cases. There have been people that have tried to recommend these kinds of things, and depending where a person is in terms of their intellectual capacities and capabilities, there's a big spread of what's advisable and what's not. Shkoyach, right? Forrest Gump, right? Forrest Gump was a good tati, right? It was a good tati. Right, eventually with the Bubba Gump. There we go. Oh, shkoyach. They're ru'uyim laholid. So he says, "Im ken yotzi de chavasam." Come over to Yosef Shulchan Aruch Sim Nalef says, as the Beis of the Shulchan Aruch explain. Now, this is where things get lebedik. If you take a look, we're in the middle of the paragraph here. V'gam, literally in the middle of the paragraph. First word on the line is v'gam. You'll see it in the middle here. So he says like this: V'gam and more than this, im hoilid mamzer kiyem ha-mitzvah. If you open up a Shulchan Aruch, you open up a Beis Yosef, if a person gives birth, meaning fathers a mamzer, you have fulfilled the mitzvah of Pru Urvu. Now, what's a mamzer? Right. So, a child that is born from a sexual encounter where there would either be a chiyuv kares or a chiyuv misa. Let's define what that means. Chiyuv kares means somebody that chiyuv kares aside from nida, that would be the exception. But a chiyuv kares or a chiyuv misa, meaning somebody else's wife or a member of one's immediate family, right? So those would be the chiyuvim that would render a mamzer. Amen. As opposed to, for example, a pnuya, a non-married girl, right, a single girl that you're not married to, that child is not a mamzer. Now, this is different from how Christianity defines a bastard. Right, meaning a child born out of wedlock is not a mamzer lahalacha. Right? Child born out of wedlock is not a mamzer.
What are they?
They're not born
No
in wedlock. They're Jewish.
Is there any term or any halachic ramifications?
Not halachic ramifications. Hold on, let's put on do not disturb there. They are not halachic ramifications. They are like yichus ramifications and probably psychological ramifications.
Did you get kares for being with your wife?
Yes, so that's an exception.
He said
that's an exception. Yeah.
I was going to ask that question.
Yeah. So that's so the no, I'm saying so you should know by the way that that's something that a lot of children of Bali Tshuva have questions about. Born from parents that were not keeping Tumah V'Tara, and there's a lot to say about that. All of the poskim Mizmanas explain that there's work that a person can do and should do in terms of their own taras mishpacha to fix up whatever their parents did or didn't know. Practically speaking, a mamzer means somebody that is born from a wife of someone else, or from a sister, mother, grandmother, aunt, those daughter, granddaughter, that would
A sexual
result.
relationship that's forbidden by the Torah.
Correct. Forbidden by the Torah with an isur misa or kares, not an isur lach. Meaning,
Not all of them have the Isra.
right? Meaning, sleeping with a unmarried girl that went to the mikveh, so she's tahora, but she's not married to you. So that is an isur pnuya. That's an isur kadesha, right? That's the prohibition of prostitution, is having a sexual relationship outside of marriage. That's the isur of prostitution, but it's not going to result in a mamzer. But this is what's interesting, is that the Shulchan Aruch writes and the Beis Yosef writes that if a person has a mamzer, you fulfilled the mitzvah of Pru Urvu. You fulfilled the mitzvah. Says V'nirim and Divrei Hagos Rama. If you take a look at the Rama, it's B'Shem Rashba. The Stam Hadavar Delav Dafka Im Hayel Mamzer Beheter. This is not talking about when you were allowed to have a mamzer. For example, Kagon Ger Shemuter Lisa Mamzeres. The halacha is that a ger, a convert to Judaism, is allowed to marry a mamzeres, a female mamzer. A Jew is not allowed to marry a mamzer, but a convert is allowed to marry a mamzer. Right? A convert is allowed to marry a mamzer. Like the Gemara says in there, but the problem is that you're going to have a mamzer from that marriage. It's not advisable, right? And that mamzeres never goes away, because generation after generation after generation, meaning a mamzer has a mamzer has a mamzer has a mamzer. There's no way of unmamzifying them. They are mamzified forever.
Sounds kind of cool.
Terrible.
Isn't that a self-perpetuating problem? Though?
Yes.
Because each one of them has the mitzvah of Pru Urvu.
So that's
You're saying you have to fulfill the mitzvah, but you can't fulfill the mitzvah.
yeah. It's a terrible predicament to be in. Amongst the saddest and most tragic of predicaments in halacha, and we do everything that we can to avoid that predicament.
How do we even know?
So the din is that if you don't know, you have no obligation of investigating. That's important to know. Right? There's no obligation to investigate. But if you do know, that's a problem. Right?
It's an extent if you can't tell the difference.
For example, this is recorded. I don't know if I should say, but I'll tell you the story because it's good to know. It's good to know.
Or anytime I make a
That's
joke.
that's
Because I'm ashamed of last time.
it's okay. That shame is tshuva. It's good. The there was a it's somewhat of a well-known story, but there was a woman that came to Rav Moshe Weinstein, the day I think it was of her daughter's wedding, the day of her daughter's wedding, and it was like by the chassan tish and everybody's like singing, dancing. Rav Moshe was going to be the Masana Kedushin by this wedding. And this woman, it was daughter, someone, whatever it was, woman says to Rav Moshe, I need to speak to you in private now. I need to speak to you in private right now. It's like, okay. So they go off to like a corner and she says to him, I've had this weighing on my conscience for 22 years since my child was born. I had an affair and this child is born from that union. I had an affair. This child is not. This child's a mom's Sarah's. Right.
If that's your reaction, don't watch Game of Thrones.
So don't watch Game of Thrones in general.
Yes.
That's from what I understand, it is not kosher.
Because you can't finish it, so you're just gonna be upset at the end.
Also, because from what I understand, it's osir.
Yes.
Most things are.
Yeah. So what do you say, gentlemen?
La la la, I didn't hear anything you said.
But you did.
What?
He's saying, what would you do in that
Yes,
situation?
the rabbi-
Oh, what did the rabbi say? The rabbi said.
Don't
The rabbi
tell
said.
He's saying, what would
Don't
you
tell the
do?
girl who's getting married. Just don't
But-
Hold on. It's the son of the mother.
Yeah.
The daughter. The daughter.
No, it's the
But-
daughter.
it's saying, but-
who's the mom's there?
The
The
daughter.
mom's one of the two. One of the two. Doesn't make a difference.
It doesn't matter because the child.
Okay, Rabbi Stefan Christ said, "Don't say anything."
Rav Moshe
Alright.
said, no, the din is if you know what it is, then Rav Moshe can't be the Masada Kedushin. He can't officiate this wedding if there's an Isser.
You leave the wedding, but
That's
the
so
person
awkward.
doesn't know.
Person doesn't know.
So then you're good.
Rav Moshe looked at her and said, I don't believe you. Mazel tov.
That's smart.
I don't believe you. You don't have the right to say that your child's a mamzer. Who says? What you did DNA tests? You did? I don't know. You don't know. You might have slept with somebody, which is osir, and you shouldn't have done that. But we have a principle in Shas. This is just the background. This was in the daf a couple of days ago in Daf Yomi. Rov be'ilas achar haba, that the vast majority of times that a woman has intercourse will be with her husband, even if she has an affair. The majority of the times is with her husband. So rov be'ilas achar haba. So by majority, this child is your husband's child. It's not born from that union. You don't know. I don't know. I don't believe you. Stop speaking lashon hara about the chassan and kala.
And he did the wedding.
Yeah, and off you go.
I knew I'd figure it out.
Meaning, there's
Need
no
to make this work somehow.
right, and there's no mitzvah to go do a DNA test. By the way, it is also one of the reasons that DNA tests are inadmissible in Bate Din today. Now, that's not because we don't believe in DNA tests, but every now and then this happens. This happens like once in a yovel. That more than once in a yovel. That you'll have like one of these like very vicious divorce situations where they'll come to Beis Din and the husband and wife will be fighting over whatever, and then Beseda, they'll get to the stipulations of like how much he has to pay for supporting the children, right? And he'll say, "They're not my children. They're not my children. My wife was sleeping around. These are not my children. I'm not obligated to pay." Right? And she'll say, "They are your children. Of course you're obligated to pay." And he'll say, "Prove it. Let's get a DNA test." So the Beis Din will never ever order that DNA test. Why? Because otherwise you might prove that they're mamzerim. You never want to prove that they're mamzerim. What are you doing to these kids for the rest of their lives? He makes an accusation. Who cares about his accusation?
So classic Judaism.
I'm saying if you
let's just not look into it. It's
so
not- we'll
you
assume the best.
that's a din mid'oraisa that you don't need to investigate it. If you know it, meaning if it's public and you
no
know.
good will come from it.
Correct. I mean, there's no obligation of
No good
investigating.
will ever come from
If you do investigate it and you find out what it is, you're in trouble. So don't investigate. Don't investigate. If you investigate it, you're in trouble. That's a problem. So that's the Gemara says in Vamas that mishpacha shenitma not with not miloshen tameh but miloshen timua, that it becomes mixed up. Nitma. We don't ask questions.
Banking compliance. How you feel?
There you go. So the din is like this.
Typically, don't.
We don't want mamzerim. This is also why, by the way, in order to prevent mamzeris, and this is very, very important, preventing mamzerim is one of the primary driving forces behind all of the halachas of gittin. It is why we have the tragedy of agunas today, when a husband refuses to give a get. So we take that very seriously. And we do everything in our power to ensure that he gives a get. And we do everything in our power to have a halachic prenup now, so that people sign the halachic prenup and don't end up in a situation where a wife is going to be an aguna. Because in those situations, you really can't do anything. Meaning, if she wants to go and get married to somebody else, she can't. Those children will be mamzerim. And what is often perceived, and this is just important to put in perspective, what is often perceived as the cruelty towards the wife that is an aguna, it is cruel, but it is the greatest kindness for those future children, is ensuring that the get is done appropriately. Because the last thing that you want is for this woman to say, well, I'm leaving my husband, I'm going. I mean, in that case, you do know that these children are mamzerim, because she's separated from her husband and she's living with another guy. That becomes very, very tragic. So whenever you find like people like screaming and shouting about agunas, like the point is that we want to prevent mamzerim. That's the goal here.
Why isn't there like another way out? Women hate this.
Yes.
It's like a modern problem. We find all these loopholes with other things.
So
The loophole is he doesn't have to give a get if he's dead, right?
yes. By the way, there was there's a famous story of Rabbi Akiva Eiger like that.
Like when they break his legs until he gives it.
No, there was a famous story of Rabbi Akiva Eiger like this, that Rabbi Akiva Eiger was Pesach Hadar. There was a recalcitrant husband didn't want to give his wife a get. So Rabbi Akiva Eiger like demanded that he come meet him in his office, and this guy was like hell-bent on like never giving my wife a get. Rabbi Akiva Eiger met with him. He had like this apartment office that was like in like an attic. It was like a ladder that you had to like climb up outside, like the old school, like, you know, not staircases, modern staircases inside of the house. Like you had to like climb up the staircase to get into
spaces.
right to get into the attic. So he like walks into this room, and Rabbi Akiva Eiger is sitting there with a lot of svarim around him, and he says to him, the din is that you have to give your wife a get. She doesn't want to be married to you anymore. You don't want to be married to her anymore. The din in the Torah is that you have to give her a get. He says, I will not be giving my wife a get. So Rabbi Akiva Eiger opened the first Mishnah in Kiddushin and said, can we learn a Mishnah together? He said, okay. The din is that Isha Niknes Bekesav V'shtar B'biyah. A woman can become engaged, can have Kiddushin with kesef, with ring, with money, with shtar, with the document, the b'biyah, or with intercourse. V'koines atzma, and she reacquires herself to not be connected to her husband. Beget of Mrs. Abal, with a get or with the death of the husband. He goes, okay. Ricky Vega looks at him and goes, choose. Choose. He goes, what do you mean choose? Do you want to give her a get or do you want to die? So he looks at him and goes, you crazy rabbi, you and all your nonsense, blah, 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 blah. Storms out, walks outside, falls down, dies. Falls down. He was sitting at his desk. Choose. Which one?
Learning Torah and he fell and died.
Beget or misdabal? Beget or misdabal. That's one or the other, right? Okay. I think it once happened. I don't remember who the gadol was, but there was you could only do this in small towns, But like there was one town that in Europe that there was like a recalcitrant husband didn't want to give the wife a get, and they put him in chayrim, and nothing was working. Nothing was working. He refused to give the wife a get. It went on for like weeks, months, whatever it was. So the Rav of the town said, "I have a solution." What's the solution? He locked the mikveh. The mikveh will not be open until this man gives his wife a get. You best be sure that get was given that day. A couple of very angry husbands, took care of the get being given. The get was given. It was not. It didn't take too long. These are the kind. Sometimes social pressure is helpful. Okay, so the din is that if a person has a mamzer, gives birth to a mamzer, meaning father's a mamzer, you have fulfilled the mitzvah of Pru Urvu. There is an enormous problem with this. He says, and this is not just somebody that the only child that they can have is a mamzer because they're a mamzer or because they're married to a mamzer. Fine. Because of he says, Ad Kan L'Shana Beis Yosef. He says, according to the Ritva, it's very clear, and this is how the Beis Yosef passes, that if you have a mamzer, somebody, whatever it is, sleeps with another man's wife, she has a son, he's fulfilled the mitzvah of Pru Urvu. Says, and the din is that this child is his lechol davar. It's his child. And will count as his son to be a son that he has children that if he dies, his this guy's wife won't have to find the brother-in-law to do yibum chalitza. And this means even if you are sleeping with your sister or your mother, well, not you, somebody sleeping with their sister or their mother, be'isur, this is an isur. Says, and the Gemara discusses what happens if this child hits his father, which there's an isur deraisa of hitting your father. He says, fine. We pass on that as b'nai l'chol davar. This is your son for all matters, including Pru Urvu. Skip the next line because starting from with the paragraph ach and one line down it says v'zeh. See in the middle of the line v'zeh. Says the Minchas Chinuch. V'zeh zman kabir kashisi. I've had a problem with this din for a long time. I've been bothered by this halacha for a long time. It says delama yotzi yidei chavasa. How come you fulfilled your mitzvah of Pru Urvu? What's the problem? What's he asking? He's bothered. How come you fulfilled your mitzvah of Pru Urvu?
What's the scenario?
With the mamzer?
Yeah, meaning you have Reuven sleeps with Shimon's wife. What? No, Reuven sleeps with Shimon's wife. Shimon's wife has a baby. The baby's a mamzer. Reuven has now had a son. He has a daughter from his wife. Now he's fulfilled the mitzvah of Pru Urvu. What's the problem there?
Why do you get a mitzvah of that?
Oh, so there's a halachic terminology for this.
Yeah.
Mitzvah ha-ba'a be'avera. This is a mitzvah ha-ba'a be'avera. The halacha is, if I steal your lulav and shake your lulav, have I fulfilled the mitzvah of lulav? No. I picked up a lulav, shook the lulav. Have I fulfilled the mitzvah of lulav? No. It's a lulav hagazel. It's a stolen lulav. How can you have a mitzvah ha-ba'a be'avera? If I steal your money and give it to tzedakah, have I fulfilled the mitzvah of tzedakah?
So I have an idea why.
Okay.
Because you could argue that it's indirect enough that it's not directly related.
Okay, so
Because Pru Urvu is not fulfilled instantly by the child being born. It's fulfilled by that child then going and having children.
or being capable of having
So,
children.
for instance, if I pushed someone, hurt someone, did an avera, but I hurt them in a way that suddenly put them on a path that they found the one they love, and suddenly I'm a shadchan. So I did an avera, and a mitzvah came from it, but it wasn't directly. It wasn't like I pushed the person into them, and boom, they got married right away. It's down the line. So the mamzer down the line.
So
does something.
hold on to that thought because the gap isn't that big, but there is a gap. The gap is, and we're going to discuss this, the gap is when do you fulfill the mitzvah of Pru Urvu?
You said when the kids have the children.
Well, no. That's when you know you fulfilled the mitzvah of Pru Urvu.
When you have two kids.
When you have two kids that are capable of having their own children,
They're one of each.
right?
Replacement.
But when do you fulfill that mitzvah?
When the kids are born.
When they're born, right? Gentlemen, who gives birth to the children?
The woman.
Not us, right?
Depends.
Our involvement, no, we spoke about it in Androgynous and Tumtum, right? Our involvement is 9 months earlier. Is that act, is sexual intercourse the mitzvah of Pru Urvu?
No.
No.
It's a means to an end.
Right. Meaning you've done an activity that under all of the right circumstances will lead to the mitzvah of Pru Urvu. But, and we're going to discuss this in a moment, but there
It's
is,
like a sperm donor also.
we'll get there. We'll get there.
It's a similar scenario.
We'll get there. Hold on to that. Nisabir Bam Batya, so that we'll talk about. I don't know if we'll have time tonight.
Oh,
But
I came just for that.
right. There is a gap. There is certainly a gap between doing the act and doing the mitzvah. And it's not necessarily that this act leads to this mitzvah. Sometimes you can try to have children for a long time and not have children.
But how do you know that Reuven got Shimon's wife pregnant? Maybe it was Shimon got his wife pregnant.
Well,
We don't want to assume just because she's pregnant.
that's
If
true.
he happened to sleep with her, we assume that's most of the time that's how we know that for sure anyways.
Right, because Shimon's been on business for 2.5 years.
Ah, okay.
So for sure it's not Shimon,
Okay.
right? Now, it could be Reuven, it could be Levi, right?
Could be anyone.
But Reuven knows that it was him,
Okay.
right? If Reuven knows that it was Reuven, so Reuven wants to know, do I need to now go have another kid? Or have I fulfilled the mitzvah of Pru Urvu? Now, if you're wondering, all of a sudden this adultery is so makbid on like the mitzvah of Pru Urvu, you'd be surprised how from people get in different weird ways, right? So big deal, this person happens to be, an adulterer, but he also cares about the mitzvah of Pru Urvu. That is not a stira. It used to be once upon a time that people would have these stiras.
Everyone thinks in Jesus.
Right, I'm saying it used to be that people had stiras in like these kinds of things. Today, that's not the case, right? Like today, Baruch Hashem, Mikam Yisrael, even the biggest sinners in the world want to do big mitzvahs. Like, look at all the money that I embezzled from the United States government. I'm now going to build a shul with it. Right?
It was our money to begin with.
What?
It was our money.
Yeah,
They
they took it from right. Okay, so he says like this: "V'zezman kaver kashisi delama yotzi dechavasai haloi have a mitzvah baba avera." How come I fulfill the mitzvah if I have a mamza child? There's a mitzvah baba avera. Says Ladas harbi rishonim, according to many rishonim. Turning over the page, take a look at the base on the top of the right-hand column. Mitzvah baba avera min haTorah eina yotze. The psul of a mitzvah baba avera, that which it invalidates by a mitzvah baba avera, is biblical. It's not a rabbinic law that's added as an extra touch to the mitzvah. It is a biblical psul. A stolen lulav is not able to be used on sukkahs at all on a biblical level. It's not that the Chachamim said no, you shouldn't do it. Minat Torah, you couldn't. So how do you fulfill the mitzvah of Pru Urvu like this? So the Ladas Tosis in Sukkah, if you take a look at, he says, I'll call upon him in the Rabbanan. Any Yotzv. Dvarim Atikmi Yashavti, it says, Tosis in Sukkah discusses maybe it's a din Rabbanan. But according to the vast majority of the Poskim, it's a din Daraisa. So the Yashavti, and I'll tell you how I've explained this. He says, Al Pi as far as Achronim. If you take a look at the Achronim, he says, V'ayin Shara Melech, Hilchos Lulav. If you take a look at the Shara Melech in Hilchos Lulav, the mitzvah abba ba'avera lo have, that this is not defined as a mitzvah abba ba'avera. Ella im b'shas mitzvah oise gam kein avera. It's only a mitzvah abba ba'avera if the mitzvah and the avera are being done simultaneously. The mitzvah and the avera happen at the same time. That's a mitzvah abba ba'avera. Says the Esrog Hagozl b'shas hanatila over al v'heshav esagzela. what's the isser that you are doing when you steal, when you shake a lulav and esrog that you stole?
What's the what?
What's the isser? What's the prohibition? What's the avera?
Stealing.
Stolen item.
No. The problem with a stolen lulav,
You have to own it?
no.
Then what?
The problem, you do own it. You-
steal it?
You steal something, you own that thing.
Okay.
It belongs to you. It's a kinyan gzeil. You own it as a result of your theft. It's not a psul in lachem. It's a lot to talk about in the Rishonim and Acharonim about this. It's not, the psul is not in that you don't own it. You do own it. Let's say we've dealt with that problem. What's the problem?
You're like using illegitimate.
What avera are you doing at the same time as the mitzvah?
Owning the stolen object.
Say what?
You're owning the stolen object.
So what
You're
is
not-
that an
you're
avera
not-
to
you're
own a
not-
stolen object?
You're not returning it?
You have a perpetual mitzvah of returning the stolen object. You have a stolen object in your hand. What are you supposed to do with it?
Return it to the owner.
Return it to the owner. What are you doing with it?
I'm the new owner. I stole it.
Say you have the din of a heshav is exela shagozel. You have to give it back, right? You have to give it back.
But you also have to say it, bro.
Correct. But
Not that one.
at the same time as you're saying the bracha on the lulav and picking up those lulav and esrog, you are negating the obligation that you have to give it back. That is the mitzvah that comes at the same time as the avera. Simultaneously, you are doing it both a mitzvah and an avera with the same object at the same time. That's the mitzvah of avera.
Where do we learn that?
Say what?
Where do we learn that?
So he says this is how the Shara Melech explains with regards to mitzvah to lulav
This is
hagazel.
Gemara, though?
So this is how the Shara Melech explains the Gemara.
Okay.
No, that has to be the same object, right? That concept can only really apply when you're
Yes.
talking about the same
The
object.
same thing.
Because I could, at any time of the day, I could be not going to do a mitzvah somewhere, but
Yes.
instead doing a mitzvah
Okay.
here with something else.
Yes.
Do we have more examples?
We're gonna get there.
Like things that deal with like food or something.
Yes.
That's not stolen.
So I'll give you an example. There is a din that a kohen is allowed to and actually obligated in eating truma. Right? Truma is a percentage of your grain, my grain. I'm in Yisrael. Please God, we should be zeicha. I'll have a farm in Eretz Yisrael. I will have grain. I will give a 40th, a 50th, or a 60th, right? Around there, somewhere between 1% and 2% of my grain to the kohen. That is called truma. The kohen is obligated in eating truma. I am forbidden to eat truma. If I take that grain that belongs to the kohen and I'm forbidden from eating it, I make that into flour and I bake matzahs with that. And the mitzvah of eating matzah. Exactly the same time.
What about when it's more practically actually going to happen?
Isn't it sukkah?
Say what?
We have a mitzvah to actually build a sukkah.
It's a hechsher mitzvah to build a sukkah.
That makes sense.
I'll give you an
I've
example.
never heard a million examples like you can't do it, and all of a sudden it's just like
I'll give you an example.
turned on its head right now. So now I have to rethink
Right.
all those examples and be like, no, actually, the Avera already happened.
Right.
I'm done with the Avera now.
Davening. Davening in a bathroom.
Right, but you're still in the bathroom.
Right.
Can't do that.
Correct. Davening in the bathroom.
I'm trying to think of like one where the Avera actually passed.
Yeah.
That I would assume that, but actually, like.
So
What
there's
do you think
there's a fascinating Rambam. We pass on this halacha. If I steal your lulav and shake your lulav, have I fulfilled the mitzvah of lulav?
On every night except the first night.
No.
All
No, you have.
It's not a problem of lachem. It's a problem of mitzvah ba'avera. I need to give the lulav back. If I steal your shofar and blow that shofar, have I fulfilled the mitzvah of shofar? Yes. Yes.
Why? Because he asked the question.
Yes.
So
Why?
obviously it was going to be
So- Because the chefts of the mitzvah, the object of the mitzvah is not the shofar.
it's the sound.
It's the sound of the
And
shofar.
hearing it.
And you can't steal sounds. This, by the way, happens to be one of the original sources the Chasam Sofer discusses this. One of the original sources discussing ownership of intellectual property.
I was about to say.
Right?
So the kids feel sorry.
Yeah.
It's hard to live on intellectual property.
So you can't steal it, but you can steal the rights to it,
Right.
which is interesting. Let's take a look inside here. So it says like this. He says, "Ein shara melech mitzvah ba'avera lo yahave ela im b'shas mitzvah oise gam ken avera. The be'esher gagos b'shas netila over al behesher v'zgzel." You are negating the positive mitzvah of returning the stolen object. It says, "Zel mitzvah ba'avera. Aval im b'shas hamitzvah leka avera klal kegoin b'hoitzi matzah mirishus hayochel rishus harabim." What happens if you carry? It's the first night of Pesach, and it is also Shabbos. And you carried the matzah from a Rishus HaYachid to Rishus HaRabim. Meaning, with this matzah, you have violated Shabbos. That's how you have it at your Seder. You broke Shabbos, right?
Yeah, but the Avera is over.
Right, so he says, that's not a mitzvah of Avera.
So you can do that.
No, you can't do that. That's an Avera. But you fulfilled the mitzvah. It's not like, no, now you're allowed to. Right. It says, "Im b'shas ha-mitzvah leka avera klal kegoin b'hoitzi matzah rishus hayachid rishus harabim kiyim ha-mitzvah leka avera klal." There's meaning at the time that you're doing the mitzvah, there's no avera at all. He says, "Lo yahave mitzvah b'avera." That's not called the mitzvah b'avera. Im kein hachanami. He says, if this is so, says the Minchas Chinuch, my argument is as follows: No de ha-mitzvah shel habanim ba al yedei avera the bias isur. It's true. This child is the result of a union that was osur midaraisa. You right, Reuven. We'll pick on Reuven. Right. This is always the. Like some Reuven that's like really annoyed right now. Whenever you learn Maseches Yevamos, like it's terrible. It's terrible. Like all the Rishonim Acharim talking about like Yaakov and Leah and Reuven and Shimon. It's like awful. But no, what can you do? You gotta understand. That's the din. So no, the mitzvah shalabanim ba'al yidei averu de bias isur mikol makom. Ha mitzvah say haynu habanim va'beilahu rak hechsher mitzvah. Intercourse is not the mitzvah; it's a hechsher mitzvah. It's a hechsher mitzvah. What you've done is you have done the preparation for the mitzvah. That's not the mitzvah itself. You built the sukkah. Sitting in the sukkah is the mitzvah. The hechsher mitzvah is to build the sukkah. You've done a hechsher mitzvah. It says, "V'ir shabaloiza." It's impossible to have children without intercourse. This child only came about as a result of this union. It says, "V'haraya," and I'll give you a proof. Tim loy hoylid, v'chein im mesu habanim loy kiyam mitzvah. If those children were incapable of having their own children, or they died, loy kiyam mitzvah, you haven't fulfilled the mitzvah. V'kevan the ikar kiyam mitzvah him habanim, because the mitzvah is fulfilled in having the children. And at the point in time that you have the children, you're not doing the Avera anymore. The Avera is long gone. You've already done tshuva for the Avera. That's a from way of saying it, right? You've already done tshuva for the Avera. The Avera is over. It says the Avera kvar nasis b'shasa be'ila. The Avera has already happened. It's as if you have taken the matzah from one domain to another domain on Shabbos. That's not called a mitzvah ba'avera. You can eat that matzah. You shouldn't have done it, but if that's the only matzah you have, then you eat the matzah. Now, if the only lulav you have is a stolen lulav, should you shake it?
Define stolen.
There's no mitzvah, right?
Define stolen.
It belongs to someone else, and you took it without their permission.
What if we can assume that if they knew that I needed to make a mitzvah because they're a God-fearing Jew that bought a lulav, that anyone that would have found it would get to use it? Why can't we assume that?
We can, so long as you're borrowing it. But if you stole it,
Let's say what's the difference of stealing and borrowing in this scenario?
With no intention of returning
Yeah.
it.
Why
it's
Why are you what?
Did
Oh,
you ever
like
put-
you see, you take it, and you're like, okay, I need one. I'm about to jump on the bus, and I forgot my lulav, and I
Right.
see one sitting there because I
Right.
went to the bathroom.
Right.
I'm taking it, jumping on the
We
bus.
correct.
But if I just do it quickly, it's okay, and then put it back.
Right.
down.
So arguably that would be the problem of lachem. Do you own it? That would be a problem the first day.
Yeah.
Later days of Sukkot, yeah, you could assume that we have this thing by Talis and Tefillin, that in general Jews want other Jews to do mitzvahs with their property, sure, right? But with
Yeah,
their
fine.
property, not by stealing it and making it not their property, right?
Moving the location is where the line is.
Right.
Wouldn't
Or-
stealing an item because of the perpetual need to return?
Yes.
Moving it.
So like anything,
Leaving where it
forbid, a
is.
safer.
Yes.
You stole, Ruben stole a safer. Every
Mhm.
time Ruben picked that safer up to learn,
Yes. It's a mitzvah b'avera. Correct.
that would hit it.
Yes. If you stole a mezuzah and put it on your door,
Right.
you have not fulfilled the mitzvah of mezuzah.
The mezuzahs are so expensive, though.
Exactly. Right? But yet, not only have you done an avera, you have also not fulfilled the mitzvah. That is not the case with if, Aunt Sadie, who is not Shomer Shabbos, drove over to your Seder and brought matzah with her. Do you need to say to her, Aunt Sadie, we cannot eat this matzah?
No, 'cause it's not the same object.
Meaning that it might be a separate question that b'chdei sheyasu, depending on how long that. But meaning, if you ate the matzah, would you have fulfilled the mitzvah of matzah?
So,
Yes, because the avera is done. It's over. The avera is finished. Now what you have is the mitzvah. Now what you have is the mitzvah.
if anything, it would be more like on Shabbos if she came over and baked a perfectly kosher challah on Shabbos. You can't eat that challah
Right. So that's a separate issue. Meaning
you
that's
can't eat something
because she
that was cooked on
she
Shabbos.
Correct.
made right, but she made that challah through an avera, and then she's trying to feed you that.
Yeah, but there's another.
so. There's no again. There's
Unless
can't
that's
eat-
separate.
You can't eat it until after.
right.
You can't eat it until after Shabbos.
Right, but you can't. I'm saying you can't make hamotzi on it on Kiddush.
Right. So here's the differentiation. We have a din that you're not allowed to get benefit from something that was done through the violation of Shabbos. That's a separate halacha. That's a separate halacha. But in theory, right, if Aunt Sadie drove over matzah on on erev on Seder night, whatever the case is, and now you wanted to use that matzah for lechem mishnah for next Shabbos, right? Is that a mitzvah bal ba'avera? No. An avera was done with this matzah. That's
Oh, I
true.
have a
What if
question.
What if she had gone to the store, let's say Winn-Dixie, and bought you matzah during
Again-
Yom Tov Pesach?
again,
and
that's
then
also-
brought you over that matzah that was just purchased.
Again,
for-
that's also an issue of getting hana'ah from violation of Shabbos.
What
but-
Yom Tov?
What?
This is Yom Tov.
And Yom Tov as well. I mean, you violate, but can you then use it after Yom Tov? Yes. There's no mitzvah, meaning you can make lechem mishnah on it. You can make hamotzi on that matzah. There's no problem, right? That's a separate problem of b'chdei sheyasu. You have to wait until the time that it would have taken to have done that after Shabbos, so as not to get benefit from the malacha that was done on Shabbos. But this matzah is not avera matzah, as opposed to the stolen lulav, which is an avera lulav every time you hold it. Every time you hold it, there's a din of v'heshiv exera.
I have a question.
Yes.
So let's say a non-Jewish relative comes over for Pesach Seder, they bring wine. You're allowed to use that for the fourth kosher. Is that a mitzvah about the era or no? It wouldn't be, right?
Yeah,
The
so-
era is over.
Yeah, so there's a few
This is
parts
a
to this.
practical example. This
Right.
could happen.
So there are a few pieces to that question. Firstly, you need to make sure that it's mavushal wine. Otherwise, if you have non-Jews at the Seder,
Not Jews, not religious Jews.
if you have an irreligious Jew that brings over wine to your Seder, meaning drove over the wine on
Yeah.
Shabbos, on Yom Tov. So if it came from outside of the Tchum, so then, meaning they drove from far away, it came from outside of the Tchum, that would probably, according to at least a lot of Rishonim, that would be an Izer D'Oraisa to carry something across, or to travel across the Tchum. And using that on Shabbos Yom Tov would be problematic in that regard. ostensibly, if they brought something over, they were driving and they brought it over from nearby, they should not use it, but you probably could.
But they're going to use it.
Right. So you probably don't want them to benefit from their Chilul Shabbos, Chilul Yom Tov. So if you can avoid,
Wow, this happens though. This
Yes.
definitely happens.
yeah, if you can avoid serving that bottle at that meal,
And
that would
that's
be a
like
good idea.
rude. You didn't serve their bottle.
Right.
And then the non-religious Jews love when you're rude and you're religious.
Right.
You're a bad person.
No. So I'll tell you a secret. It's much easier to be ditzy than rude. You'll be like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I totally forgot to serve your bottle. Meaning, let me put it in the fridge to chill it, and then you forget about it.
Right.
Ta-da.
Accidentally forget it in the freezer.
Well, then it explodes. That's a bad idea. I've done that before. It's not a good idea.
If it's sparkling, yeah, it will explode.
No, even if it's not sparkling,
It
if you
explodes?
freeze
Yeah.
wine, the bottle
Really?
will crack. Yeah.
Never frozen wine.
Anything
That's,
a beer.
Don't freeze it.
Yours are
Done.
sparkling.
I mean, Rabbi, the simplest scenario would be making
Yeah,
making a bracha on something that's not kosher.
Right.
That would be the simplest one. Making
So-
a bracha
Saying
on
God's
something
name
that's not
in vain.
kosher.
So the din is that you don't make a bracha on food that
But the
isn't
idea is,
kosher.
like, if you try to make like, oh, I can't not say bracha. I don't know if this is really kosher.
Right. So the din is, say what?
Is that the same?
So that's not a mitzvah of avera. That's just an avera.
Yeah.
But you want to, but still, you have the mitzvah of whatever you put in your mouth. You say
No.
a
No, you
bracha.
don't have an obligation.
No.
You're not
Even if you're, let's say, those scenarios that they give you where you're stuck on an island and you don't really have the option.
Yes, that is an
You
interesting
make a
question.
bracha,
Hey,
or
there's
do
only
you-
pig. There's only pig there.
No,
Coconuts. Oh, there's no mosquitoes.
Let's
You're
say-
telling the coconuts.
Let's say you're on some island and you're starving, there's nothing to eat, and they're cooking fish. You don't know what else they made, octopus or whatever. You have a fish. It's probably not kosher. Do you make a bracha?
If you
or not?
inspect
It's
it
a good
for
challenge. We're not going to do that
fish
challenge now because I want to finish this
Okay.
up.
You inspect
We got another
you
minute
inspect
here.
it for fish and
Stop it
scales.
on that.
It's good.
We can
It says
have-
Va'advarim Aruch. I mean,
Oh, this is
there's,
an open key
there's an
to that.
article in the weekly that I wrote about this like a couple months ago.
Oh, okay.
So I'll send it to you. Va'advarim
You gotta
Aruchim.
read it now.
V'hadvarim aruchim medine mitzvah ba'avera ve'en kamakam. He says there's a lot to speak about with mitzvah ba'avera, but we're not going to go. He says into all of the details of it now. What comes out fascinatingly is halacha lemaisa is not lemaisa because nobody should do this, but what we have now is we've picked up a couple of interesting principles. We have a new definition of mitzvah ba'avera, which is an avera that is happening simultaneous to the mitzvah. It has to be simultaneous to the mitzvah, otherwise it is not a mitzvah haba ba'avera. A mitzvah haba ba'avera is a psul in the mitzvah itself. You have not fulfilled the mitzvah. You haven't fulfilled the mitzvah. You have only done an avera. I'm going to throw a wrench into this, and we'll talk about this next week. Is we have a number of times throughout Shas and in many situations of when you have a mitzvah and a positive mitzvah and a negative mitzvah that clash, that come head to head, we say we have a principle of aseh doiche lois aseh, that the positive mitzvah outweighs the negative mitzvah. And I'll give you a classical example. The Torah says you are not allowed to do malacha on Shabbos. The Torah says that you need to give a bris to a baby on the 8th day of the baby's life, baby boy. What happens if the 8th day is on Shabbos? Is surgery a malacha?
No.
Yes.
Yes.
Every surgery is a malacha. Do you do the bris on the 8th day?
Yes.
Yes, that's aseh doiche lois aseh. The positive mitzvah outweighs the negative mitzvah.
Who makes those determinations?
So the question that we now have to figure out is, what's the difference between aseh doiche lois aseh and mitzvah haba ba'avera?
There's specific like exceptions.
Meaning, simultaneous to you giving the bris, you are also violating Shabbos.
Could be the.
That sounds like a mitzvah haba ba'avera.
Like if it's a once in a lifetime mitzvah, you can't pass it. For instance, the 8th day, there's no mitzvah to do it on the 13th year.
What's another example based on its breast?
You might be.
No, you are.
You can't. Yeah, that no else. You can't carry the.
The bris is
Snipping and cutting.
pulled is not you're not filing Shabbos.
Meaning, if you would,
Cutting skin and
If
making,
it-
Snipping, cutting, sewing.
making someone bleed is definitely.
it's a malacha. If you would do that to your animal, you would be chayav, skila.
Brush your
That's
teeth and you bleed. It's not Shabbos.
If you brush your teeth and you bleed, you should brush your teeth more often.
Yeah.
Yeah.
because-
You got gum disease, my friend.
I don't know
It's,
Shabbos because I don't want to break Shabbos.
It's not the sin part, it has to be the mitzvah part that's off.
Right. So we're gonna have to figure out what's the difference. I'm gonna give you some homework.
Then when is the mitzvah really occurring?
Right. Meaning it sounds like this is a mitzvah b'avera. Giving a bris to a kid on Shabbos sounds like a mitzvah b'avera.
About like carrying what's the mohel?
Do you get the mitzvah
Knife.
right when the
knife?
malach
Knife.
Carry the
occurs?
knife.
You
But
shouldn't.
you
No.
You
So
can't carry the knife on Shabbos.
yes, because that's a hechsher mitzvah.
You
Yeah.
must not get the mitzvah right when the cutting occurs. Right when the malacha occurs is not when you get the mitzvah.
It's when the baby bleeds.
Right? When
He's asking for
when
the
is the
workaround.
mitzvah of the bris received?
When have you completed the mitzvah?
Yeah.
When you've finished the cut. Meaning you're doing the mitzvah the whole way through. Now, it is possible, by the way, to do the avera and not to do the mitzvah if you didn't do a good job.
Right.
That's like the biggest fear of every parent.
You should know, by the way, we have a Shulchan Aruch says that a moil is not allowed. Meaning, if you've never done a bris before, and this is going to be the first time that you're doing a bris, you're not allowed to do your first bris on Shabbos
Why? Yeah.
because
Loyal.
because if you mess up, meaning if you didn't cut enough, and another moil has to come and finish it, then all that you've done is violate Shabbos. You haven't done the mitzvah at all. You've just violated
How
Shabbos.
do they practice? Like, I don't want to. Nobody wants to be that first one.
Back to the thing. That's
He's
fine.
doing it. He's wants to do it for free.
Maybe.
It's great.
Loyal.
It's $2,000.
Right, but the moil's
You're
also
getting the mitzvah.
no, but the moil is performing the mitzvah. Moil is doing the mitzvah, and
You're getting a mitzvah, no?
and in general, the chiyuv of giving a bris is the father's mitzvah, and he is also the moil. Now he can delegate moil duties to somebody else.
But the delegation also gets the mitzvah credit too.
So gets the credit for being a shliach for a dvar mitzvah.
So
He's
the
a
father
shaliach.
doesn't get any.
He does.
It's the father's obligation.
So there you go. So then the father gets a mitzvah but doesn't do malacha.
Right,
What if
but
the
then
father-
is the father not allowed to give his son a bris on Shabbos?
No.
Of course he
What if
is.
the father does it?
That is the primary obligation.
What if the father it's his first time?
Then he's not allowed to.
This is weird.
But he has to.
He's allowed to.
But he
it's
has
just
to
not-
get
it's
somebody
just
else
He
to do
not-
has to get someone else.
Yeah.
His hand is
recommended.
first. He's
Yeah.
not allowed to do it.
He's not allowed to.
Probably if he's the only one, he can do it. But if there's somebody else who can do it, you should have them do it.
So how do you practice, by the way? That's
I said you do it on
That's-
your own
They
kid.
have like a.
so usually a
like a
mole
beauty
does
school
bris
for
on,
this?
on their kid.
Yeah, like that's
Um,
the perfect credentials. Like you see it,
People
you don't know
practice
kid, you trust
people
it.
practice the same way that every doctor practices surgery.
Not on their own kid.
The same practice circumcising 13-year-old Arabic boys.
Oh, it's- or even just like non-religious,
Against their
non-Jewish
will?
couples or whatever.
No.
That sounds like-
Well, that's
It's
what
not like
assuming
kidnap
that
them
that's
and
what they're throwing
circumcise
out.
them. That's
Well,
not.
that's what they do. They do it at 13.
Circumcision.
All right, J Street. Yeah. Okay, clever. That is your homework. That is your homework to figure out what is the difference between a mitzvah baba vera and Esedech Halasase.
Besides the bris. Bris is one.
Um,
What are the other examples of that?
so the big day kahuna of the Kohen Gadol contains shatnez,
It was commanded by God to do it that way.
but that's a mitzvah sase and a mitzvah lo sase at the same
Is it-
time.
But is it in the Torah that that's how it has to be made?
Yes.
Okay, so it clearly
So you're saying-
overrides
so
in
you're
that
saying-
specific scenario. Because
Okay.
God said both things.
I'll give you.
So he wouldn't have said the other thing if it wasn't true. Again, in that one scenario.
I'll give you another example. The entirety of the mitzvah of yibum, levirate marriage, where a guy dies not having children, leaves his wife without having children. She has an obligation to marry his brother-in-law. That's called yibum. If he doesn't, then they do chalitza, right? But that yibum, you are not allowed to marry your brother-in-law.
Or he's dead.
You're not allowed to marry dead
Oh,
people
yeah,
in general.
so yeah, yeah.
But-
No, I'm saying.
It's a separate issue.
We gotta change that law. Or
Yeah.
that's the problem.
Right. I'm more weirded out by the dead thing.
So Yibum, what's the Avera?
The Avera is sleeping with your brother-in-law. The mitzvah is Yibum.
Is that in the Torah too?
Yes.
Yes, you
Even after he's
Yivamo Yava Allah.
even after he's dead, it retains
The Issa, of course. Meaning if they have children, then it's an Issa Daraisa. And if they don't have children, it's a mitzvah.
What if they have one child?
Then that's still, they have children, yes.
What is enough?
Chevra, that is your question. What's the difference between Aseh Chalas and Mitzvah Baba Avera? To be continued.
that's